Connected Conversations with Lena Perova, bridging worlds, one conversation at a time.
Welcome to Connected Conversations, where we meet visionary leaders of our communities. We talk about communities, challenges, and innovative solutions that drive us forward and connect us across the globe. Today, we are talking to Vince Brantley with Veritas Cultures, and we are going to be talking about what it takes today to be an effective leader of our communities. But before I start, I want to say thank you for your service, Vince.
Thank you.
Because you started your career in military, right?
Yes, the first just under 28 years in the military, yes.
And then you put a lot of effort taking our communities through diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts, correct?
Yes, I think if you go from like the 90s when I joined, 1990, so you'll find that DOD was and the military was going through all of these stages of awareness and enlightenment as far as how equity, belonging, diversity, and inclusion could play a role. When I first came in, it was not so much that way. But I think the voices of the service members start hitting the ears of leaders who are willing to listen. And you start seeing changes in policy that came out that really influenced a lot of exploration as to how we can make things better.
What do you think was driving that change?
Again, I think the voices of the people. And I think also that compounded with changes in society. So the military is a microcosm of our society. And so as society begins to evolve, the military also must evolve, because we find that we're recruiting people who are coming in, and for the most part, they are already evolved. So our leaders have to catch up.
And what do you think is, in your opinion, what was driving our society to make that change? Because I think you and I talked about this, right? So first society was driving towards this change. Now, maybe I think that in some way the society started driving back a little bit.
Yeah.
That's
So I like to think of it not so much as movement back and forth, but almost like a seesaw, that was forward moving up a wall. It kind of, so it has to balance itself. And so in order to get to the voices of those who from underrepresented groups who really had no power, a huge counter effort was kind of made to silence those who were in power to give you room to speak. But there's, you can only do that for so long before those who have been silent now feel silenced, and then it begins to shift back. And that's how I see, or how I have seen evolution happening in our society. It feels like we're moving very far and very fast in one direction, and then it almost feels like we're moving backwards, but we really are just trying to figure out some way of balancing.
so basically you're saying the progress is like 2 steps forwards, 1 step back.
It feels that way.
Yeah.
But when in actuality, it's 2 steps forward, stop, wait for the other side to make 2 steps forward, or to feel that they have, that they are also progressing. We're not so different despite our differences. And so we want to be heard. Others also want to be heard. We want to feel like this is our country. Others also want to feel like it's their country. And what you're trying to really work against is the fear and frustrations that comes with feeling like something is being taken away from you. Some level of entitlement. And so, yeah, that's kind of the struggle that I think society has been in as we are moving forward.
And then you were working on those initiatives within the military. Then you left the military and you started the company that you're currently running, Veritas Culture, right? What inspired you to start this business?
Well, I guess it would start with the inspiration to leave the military. DOD, military, government, they exist within a construct, and they really can't afford to kind of have people, like the whole thing, the principles behind being in uniform and in formations and having regulations really create a system of checks and balances. And so, likewise, they can only invest in you to a certain extent, and then they're looking for the return on investment. If you get an opportunity, such as I was given, to lead a culture effort, that was never going to be the end state. No matter how good I am at it, no matter how passionate I am about it, eventually they're going to want me to start doing some other stuff. And I came to the point in my career in which I realized that the majority of what I was bringing to the table was not the things that I was being evaluated for or paid for. It wasn't even the things that they were really training me to do. And so, if I wanted to stay within my gifts, I had to leave.
So you felt you were, and you didn't feel fulfillment, and you wanted to give back, I suppose, to the communities.
I would say I was fortunate to have gotten a glimpse of fulfillment. I was fortunate to be introduced to my passion, knowing that the military would never allow me to stay within my passion. They're going to say, well, why don't you go over here and serve over here and do this over here in this organization, and then I'm going to have to leave it. And so I had to leave the military. I mean, that was it, and start something that would allow me to serve that which I love the most.
And what inspires you today?
Every conversation, every spark in an eye, every light bulb moment, every gasp, every connection. And so I very much feel those individual steps forward as well as the collective steps forward as I work with organizations, key leaders, just people all over. And I love it. I never feel like I'm working. I always feel like this is another great day.
That is an amazing feeling.
It is.
And you also run a podcast working on the actual. So for those of you who want to check that podcast, I'm going to put notes in the end of our talk. Please visit it. I personally enjoyed very much, very interesting talks. And also trainings that you do for different communities.
Most definitely. Lately, I've been doing a lot of training, helping senior executives to become, executive leaders in their organizations. So, in government, you may be a 14 or 15, and you want to be a senior executive service member. What's the path? What are the things I need to know? What are the things that make a senior leader at that level impactful?
And you work in different communities. I noticed that you work with government, you work with corporations, you work. What is community to you?
Community is
because you work. I talk to you sometimes. You even work with churches in different areas. So, what is community to you, really?
I would define community as the ability to recognize connection. And so it can happen at multiple levels. I see the world as a community because I can see the connective tissue. If I couldn't, then I might only recognize my local community as a community. It's those inherent connections that make us understand who we are to each other.
And so today, I think that the world changed so much after pandemic, right? So pandemic happened, then, right? Like, I feel like we haven't really had a chance to recover after pandemic. Then, boom, several war zones and disasters in different parts of the world, right? Then AI. was introduced to us, and I would call it AI revolution because we'll never go back to, it's almost like electricity was introduced to our society, right?
Yes.
Then, so what do we have right now? We are moving forward. We more and more countries moving towards cryptocurrencies, and the world definitely require. There are different challenges in different communities, and I'm curious. Do you see anything that would be common among all these communities that you're working with? If there is, like, I'm sure there are different challenges that would be relevant to each community, but is there something that would be common that sort of that I'm trying to find the right word, that one challenge that would be common to all of us as a society, as humans,
So
that you see in
that's a big
today's world?
question.
Yeah.
One challenge is hard to say. I think the challenge of the human condition is still showing itself. And in all of these changes that you just spoke through, COVID, wars around the world, changes in currency, changes in communication, changes in AI, what you're seeing is our ability as human beings to adapt. And those things that we see as, or may collectively see as reward and or threats as they relate to those changes. But it's just human people humaning, right? And that has always been the same. It's the one thing that I've come to really depend on, that people are just human beings doing the best they can with what they have. And sometimes that doesn't always give opportunity, or we don't always take opportunity to make the best of ourselves in those moments. But that is, again, what makes us human.
And that being said, when you work with leaders, I think that provided all of those challenges and changes in the world, our society requires from our leaders different qualities.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and which qualities do you see today that probably were not that important several years ago, maybe 10 years ago?
So the only thing I would say is that I think that the qualities today have always been important, but we were allowed in a particular time to ignore them. And now we can no longer do that. You take the simple quality of being heard. Right? Because I Told You To was a popular style of parenting.
Yeah.
But we've outgrown that. You can't go back to that without isolating one child from the entire environment of the world, that's saying there's so much more that you need to provide in the way of guidance and in compassion. Right? And so, but it's not that people didn't need to be heard. When you look at bullying was never good. It was never something that we thought is the right thing to do. But we've evolved to a place where we can no longer ignore the impacts of it. And we're looking for it differently. It doesn't have to be, I punched you in the face or I took your lunch money. It could be, you said some very mean things to me, or you wrote them in an online chat. And I can go on and on. You take something like hazing, which was very much a part of culture when it comes down to moving through classes of society and acceptance. Whether you just earned your airborne wings and people were punching the pins into your chest over and over again, or you were pledging a fraternal or sorority organization. Right? It was very much accepted that this is the path. That there were fraternities that prided themselves on the size of their paddle. But we can no longer operate in this way, at least not openly, because we've evolved to a certain extent. So that's just human evolution, people recognizing things. Not that it ever was right, but we can't go back to being that wrong.
And so, in which qualities do you think leaders are required today to address that?
I think more now than ever, leaders need empathy. They need to be able to be open to how someone else feels. And feelings, that's dangerous ground for many people. Like, I don't want to get into feelings, just do your job, right? But you got to know what doing that job means to that individual if you hope to inspire them to do it or to do it better.
And how can we, how do you work with leaders do you think empathy is something that can be developed, can be taught, or this is the quality that either you have it or you do not have it?
I think it can be taught. I think it has to be taught in many cases. And it has to be become one of those things that we evaluate, we assess based on evidence and based on impact. And so for ages, maybe even today in some circles, there's the argument of, are leaders born or are they grown?
Yeah,
right?
we're still arguing that, right?
Today, they're still arguing. But what we do know is we evaluate leaders based on criteria, based on evidence and impact. And I think that empathy or the lack thereof can be measured in the same way. And therefore, we can do things.
How do you measure empathy?
By the impact. I guess people will be the number one voice. They'll tell you. It's funny. Like I alluded to the fact that I help teach courses that help senior executives. And so when you're sitting there and you're talking to people who've been serving in leadership capacities for 10 or 15 years, and you ask them, give me some key qualities about a leader that you admire, or even leaders that you don't admire. What you don't hear is how well they track stats or how many things they accomplished. What you hear is the way they made me feel. It comes back to that heart component. And so we know that there's evidence there because you hear it in the voices of those who you lead or you touch. And now you see a lot of organizations going to 360 surveys and actually allowing peer evaluations to become a factor in how we look at our leaders.
And again, just going back to the conversation about AI, and again, all those technical skills are just getting easier and easier to get to the organization, right? But those soft skills that we used to, I remember when I was in business school, we call them soft skills. And back then they were like, okay, well, soft skills, not important. You have to learn formulas, you have to learn finance. All of those things right now, well, you can go to ChatGPT, that will be delivered to you. But soft skills, those are, you're talking about empathy. Not so easy to develop. But you are working with this. So how do you work with the leaders, the leaders that you are mentoring and coaching?
I think the first step, you lead by example. So I'm leading them to lead differently by listening to how they see leadership.
So basically, you just mentioned listening, active listening.
Active listening, absolutely, and listening to understand, not listening in order to change them or in order to respond to them or in order to correct them. I want to understand the world as you see it, recognizing that you may see it differently than everyone else in the room. When you define leadership, how would you define it in your own words? Right? What do you value? What is it that you want out of this promotion? What is it that you want out of the government? What is it you value most? And why is it important to you? Right? All of those questions help me to understand how you see the world. And now we can start working on how to get there. It's hard to get a person to a place if you don't know where they're coming from. And so the first step is really to listen to where they're at.
Stay curious there.
Mm-hmm. You have to. And not let your level one thinking, when we talk about listening, we talk about it from 3 different levels. Level 1 is the thoughts in your head. Even now, you may be thinking of the next question. You may be thinking of what you're going to have for dinner. You may be thinking, it's hot, or there was a lot of stairs that we took. There's so much that you could be thinking in your level 1, and if we're not careful, that will diminish our level 2 capacity, which is our ability to listen to the actual words that are being said. All right. And then beyond that, you have the level 3, which is all of the nonverbal. And so the thing about that nonverbal is you'll hear so many people say, 80%, they'll throw out some statistics, 60% of listening is nonverbal communication. But in 100% of that communication, there's interpretation involved. Right? If you're sitting there with your arms folded, you could be cold, you could be angry, you could be disconnected. I'm going to interpret what that means to me if I'm not careful.
You talk about this a lot, and I remember times when you and I were disagreeing on this. Can you clarify how you teach your leaders to follow up on those?
Yeah,
nonverbal clues, I should say.
It's not that you shouldn't be listening to nonverbal communication. It's just that when I see something that's nonverbal, instead of me assigning what it means or telling you what I think it means, it looks like you've checked out of the conversation. Is that true? Now I'm putting you in a defensive position. What I can do instead is acknowledge. So I noticed that as we've been talking, you've sat back, your arms have become folded, and several times you're looking about the room. What is that about for you? Give you an opportunity to put words to the actions as opposed to me assigning them on your behalf.
Again, going back to staying curious.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I just want to know what's behind it. And I want your words, Your words are always more important than mine. And so, another part about listening, if I start editing your words, you say I'm going for a walk, and I'm saying, oh, so you're going to take a little trip. No, you said you're going for a walk. I'm going to keep your words as they are because your words are important. Now, I might want to understand when you say going for a walk, what does that mean for you? What does it look like? What do you hope to accomplish? Where might you be headed? But I'm staying within your words. I'm not going to edit them to make them my own. Every time we do that, we're basically saying my words are more important than yours.
So can I summarize a little bit? So now we are talking about the fact that to be an effective leader today, we are going to be needing empathy. Empathy comes with active listening. Active listening is a part of communication, and perhaps trust. Because I don't think, would you add trust to it?
So trust is more than likely a product of the listening. If I'm listening with genuine curiosity, then what I'm going to find is that you will feel that you're at the center of the conversation, and we'll start to build trust based on that, based on my willingness to accept your words as you put them on the table. I'm not confronting you. I'm not attacking you. I'm not trying to move you or shift you. I'm really interested in understanding where you come from and where you're coming from. When I do those things, I'm giving you reasons to trust. Okay? Trust cannot be earned. It just, you can't do it.
You say that often.
I do.
You said, could you clarify that? I always think that it's a very interesting concept that you have.
I think it's the first step to really looking at trust differently. So if trust can be earned, then I'm looking at the things I need to do in order to get your trust. And I'm evaluating my actions saying, you should trust me by now. Right? But it doesn't work that way. Trust is given. And so when you realize that trust is given, it becomes all the more important to give trust so that you receive it. I have to be able to trust that you can describe your day and that your words are exactly what they need to be so that you will trust that I'm receiving those words in a way that doesn't look to alter them.
So you're saying that you trust everybody by definition, unless the person breaks the trust.
To a measure. Right. So I'm not talking about newborn baby trust, like I just had a baby, why don't you take it for the weekend? No, I'm talking about can I trust you with things that won't necessarily harm me or destroy me. You know, can I trust you to show up on time? Can I trust you to answer the call? Can I trust that if you don't answer the call, you have a valid reason for it? If I can trust you in those ways, then I have the natural optimism it requires to be curious. Okay? Because if I'm not optimistic about the outcome, then what am I curious about? So these things all touch each other in a way that you really can't separate them. They all come together. Without trust, there's going to be no communication. Without communication, there's no connection. Without connection, how do you get to empathy?
And what you're saying is that we are going to, well, I thought, okay, just want to clarify. So you're saying that you trust by definition, and at the same time you're saying that you're building trust by those little steps. So if you trust me to show up on time, I'm showing up on time, then next time you're going to be trusting me with, driving your car. I drive your car and I don't break it, then you're going to give me the keys to your house.
It depends on the house and the car, but along those lines, gradually improving, especially when trust has been violated, like you've been disappointed, you've been let down before. To what degree are you willing to trust again? Maybe it starts with just a conversation, maybe because these are small incremental steps. And to some in some ways, those small steps seem like baby steps, but all baby steps are small steps unless you're a baby. And then they're like, get the Polaroid camera out, let's take a picture. That's the first steps.
Yes.
And so we need to understand that if we let people down, if we've hurt them, then we need to allow them the small steps.
And then we can take this on the level of communities that we started the conversation with today, right?
Yes. I mean, the nation just had an election.
Right.
And so people showed up how they showed up. They voted how they voted. And in many cases, those who may have lost may feel a certain way about those who won. And those who won may feel a certain way about those who lost. And if we're not careful, we'll fracture the connection that we so need to continue to move forward as a nation.
Right.
And so we have to begin to start trusting again, right? Like we got a president that's coming in. He was president before. Are we going to give him an opportunity to be different? If we don't, then just know that no matter what he does that's different, we won't see it that way. We won't accept it that way. And then what's the point?
Yeah, that's a good message.
Yeah, it's and a timely one. We're in this right now. I know neighbors that are talking about, I saw that sign, I'm not gonna talk to them anymore. And it's like, you were neighbors before this election. What changed? And how did the election change what you are to each other as neighbors? Their beliefs never changed. You just didn't know about them. Now that you know about them, what has changed? Maybe it's time to just knock on the door.
Yeah, and maybe understand how did you arrive to this choice? What are your values now, or what your values? Just like you mentioned, actually, that nothing changed. Same
Nothing
people.
changed. You'd be surprised the reasons why you may have voted in one direction and why they voted in another may be the same reason. You may care about the exact same thing. It's just different. And you see this as a means of getting there, but I don't see that as working out. So I'm looking at this as a means, but we want to get to the same place. Right? So through listening, you can find the connection points. And in many cases, you can reconnect connection points that have been broken. But you got to be willing to accept and appreciate the small steps.
So when you work with leaders, when you mentor and coach leaders, is there something that you can give us as a maybe maybe an exercise that we can practice on daily basis to remind ourselves what it means to be curious, because we all have those days, when the heat rushes to your head, and in my case, sometimes like, almost like the blood starts burning inside. And so when you catch yourself on this, maybe there is something that you can recommend to remind ourselves that, okay, cool down, stay curious.
Oh, yeah. I think the worst thing we can do as humans is forget that we are humans too. And so whatever those reminders are that allow you to normalize yourself, I believe that life allows us failures so that we can help those who are fallen or failing, if we apply those lessons in the right moment. Or we can just judge them and, talk down to them. But really, they made mistakes. Now, not everybody's making mistakes. I'm not saying that there aren't people out there who are truly corrupt, but how will you know the difference if you never have a conversation? So if I had to say something, a general, it would be listen with genuine curiosity and listen to understand where people are coming from. And when you get to the point where you're like, you don't feel like you can hear anything else, or you just want to shut everything down, remember the time in your life when you just needed someone to hear you out. Remember the time in your life when just being heard made all the difference, because we all have those moments.
That's a good advice going into 2025. There is a lot of unsettlement, as you mentioned, in our country with the election. But I think now that we need to breathe, embrace the fact that things are going to be okay.
Yeah. I mean, fear is only our friend as it relates to survival, right? But we got to recognize how the brain processes fear and threats. Like tunnel vision is a real thing. Fight, flight, or freeze is a real thing. And it benefits us if your life's in danger. You need to just pause or something. But when the threat is not that high, when this isn't a life or death situation, if we give ourselves opportunity, there's an opportunity to see so much more in it. Just take a step back. All right. Okay, I'm feeling something right now. Where is that coming from? Chances are it has nothing to do with you or your conversation. It has nothing to do with the election. It has to do with the fact I'm disappointed because I wanted something different. Okay. Now, if I had won, everyone on the other side would be disappointed. So let's just neutralize that. Disappointment comes with the fact that it's a competition and everyone can't win. Now, what would I expect of them? What would I say to them if I had one? I'd be looking for them to figure out how to get on board as opposed to fighting change the entire way. Okay, well, here we are. It's hard for people to stomach, I think, in some cases, that America showed up in the way it did. But if you listen to America and you understand how it has evolved and how we got to be to the state of awareness that we actually achieved, it's not hard to see
that we've already been there, right?
We've been there.
We have been there, we have done that, we arrived to where we are, and maybe that's the direction we are going, and that's just a part of the process.
For now.
For now, yeah, it's a part of the process.
Yeah. Just as sure as anything else, you can guarantee that if the pendulum swings too far, it's going to come back. But as I explained to so many people in my career and even in my business and mentoring and coaching, that we have to, if we're going to get to change, we have to be able to redefine what it looks like. Change isn't getting to a particular place or going a particular distance or even at a particular pace. It's moving so far from where you are that you can never return to where you came from. And there are so many places in our evolution, we're just not going back there. Now, if we're not careful, people will insert seeds of fear that have you wondering, is slavery coming back now? Are we going back to Jim Crow days? But we're not. We're just not. Because even people who voted in that direction, they didn't vote for that. There's always going to be a percentage of radicals in any population and in any religion. Right? Once you rule that out, now you're dealing with people who are just peopling. So what is it that they want? And why is it that they feel that is so important? You know, and then we just keep moving forward.
Do you think that that fear that you're talking about, is it natural? Is it exaggerated? I mean, again, I'm not from this country, right? You know that I came here, was like about 20-something years ago. So it took me a while to understand certain trends that U.S., that the one that we are talking about, kind of like move forward, step back, move forward, step back. And again, there are certain communities that also evolve differently in different directions. I hear from some of the communities in the U.S. exactly the same sentiment that you are sharing right now. Do we validate their fears?
It's important to listen, to understand, to see where it's coming from and how it's impacting them. And then what is it they ultimately want, and how are those fears playing a role in getting there, or how are they working against getting there? That's the conversation I would really be curious to have. And I've talked to many people who are like in a state of just shock, you know. I was in at a bar, as a matter of fact, in D.C., which, you know, I don't come here often. And I was talking to a gentleman who happened to be talking about the election, the impact, and what he thought were some of the reasons why a lot of people went in the way that they went. And so one of the things he announced was that, you know, men, you know, we've built a society where men can no longer be men. And it's not that men don't need guardrails, but they do need, to some degree, the ability to be men, right? So there was a young lady sitting at the bar when he said this, and it was kind of his parting words as he left. She said, "Would you mind if you just stayed for a moment and helped me to understand what he just said?" And you can tell she was already agitated, you know? And so in my words, in my volume, in my tone, I just was very calm. I said, "Sure, no problem at all. What did you hear?" And so she said, "Well, I heard him say that men need to be men, and I just don't understand how any man would, you know, who has daughters, for that matter, would ever want to regress to a society where..." I said, actually, if you listen to what he said was that they need guardrails. So what did you hear when you, outside of the guardrails, we're saying that those things need to be in place, what do you think he was talking about? What did you hear? And so we just got into this conversation, and she felt great when she left it. And she said, specifically, you know, I would have never had this conversation, but for some reason I felt like I could have it, and you would listen. She said, but I'm walking away with a totally different perspective. Now, that's what conversation should be, an exchange of perspectives that leaves us both changed in some way. The object of communication is change. And if we're not speaking in a way or listening in a way that leads to change, why are we speaking at all?
And that leads me to again remind that today the world is bleeding. If you, I'm talking, well, in US we are divided, and people, communities, I should say, right, scared because they, oh my God, 2025 is coming. Some of the communities happy that the elections happened in their favor. Some of the communities are, what's going to happen? We're expecting deportations and tariffs, and economy is going to fall apart. I agree with you. Mr. Trump already been our president. We've been through. He's coming back. He learned. Maybe he will be bringing something new, and we have to trust, right?
Yeah. Gotta start.
There are other countries, there are war zones around. The conversation about being an effective leader, I think, crucial right now. Again, everything that you just mentioned, empathy, active listening, communication, this is something that I don't think we would be able to move forward if we are not going to be talking and mentoring our leaders to
Absolutely.
embrace that.
Absolutely. I would add that in times like this, you need leaders more than ever, because they have to be able to translate the guidance, and they have to be able to advise in a way that may alter the guidance. But if you don't, if you don't trust that you can give that message, you won't even start it. You won't have the conversation. And the leader will then, in this case, the president, may make a decision void of that, right? As a leader in the military, I always strove to ensure that my leaders were making informed decisions. And so we owe the conversation, but we must have it in a way where we're listening to understand where the person is coming from.
Because the goal of the leader is unite.
Correct.
Not separate, unite.
And what we have to understand is, how does he define uniting? See,
That's true.
like what does that look like for him? Who is he representing? Because I have no doubt that he feels like he's on the side of people who have been denied a voice and they're sick and tired of, and he's going to try to get some things done. But he's got to do it through Congress. You know, we have an entire system of a bureaucracy that didn't go away because we changed presidents.
That's true, yes.
Right. So even your own party, you're going to run into some resistance, and there's going to be some this and that, and you only have 4 years and you don't get another. So really, what I would encourage people to do is just buckle up, take a deep breath, have a glass of water, surround yourself with people that you love and understand, and try to understand people who are really no less capable of being loved.
So what message we are sending to our communities is stay curious.
Say again?
Listen.
Stay curious.
What message we are sending to our communities is stay curious.
Stay curious.
Listen to understand. Communicate.
Communicate.
And again, what are we saying? Do we agree on the fact that empathy is something that we can learn? It's not
yes.
something that you're born with or you're not born with.
You can learn it, and you need to use it in order to build it. It's like a muscle. If it's underdeveloped, then you're just more likely to be critical of people. But empathy really allows you to see a person differently. And once they're seen, that's the first window of change. It's like, would you change your hair if there were no mirrors? You know, would you add a little bit of this or take a little bit of that? Would you have worn that shirt if you never had a way of seeing what it looked like on you? Right? But sometimes being seen is the first opportunity that you have to have a reflection, a true reflection of what you look like, what you sound like. And that can be all the imperative you need to actually do something different.
And if any of our leaders and communities that are listening to us today, Vince, where can they find you?
Oh. So, I'm on LinkedIn. You can also listen to the podcast.
What's the name? Can you
Talking on Eggshells. It's on Spotify and basically all of the platforms. We haven't done one in a while because we kind of took a break to step away from it so that we could revisit it in a way that was even more impactful. Talking on Eggshells is all about having hard conversations, having conversations that people find to be very difficult, but being able to have them from a place that can actually see all perspectives, right? And to be honest, in the world today, we get so, I think people get so bought into platforms, and they buy into social media and Instagram, and it's a way of just feeding them what they want to hear, right? So how many people actually read a paper or the news? Are we even looking for a neutral perspective? It's like we listen to the platform that's going to give us the message in the way we want to receive it. And there's a danger in that, because you're closing off all the people who see things differently. So that was Talking on Eggshells. It was supposed to be a place where people could listen to conversations, knowing that you had two people who, even if we didn't agree, we at least could understand where others are coming from.
That's a great podcast. Guys, please find the Talking on the Eggshells. There are a lot of good information there. And then, of course, we are going to be posting the contact information for Vince if you want to take some of his mentorship and classes for leadership development, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings for your organization, or just for individual classes. I took one. It was fantastic. Thank you, Vince, for visiting us today. It was a fun conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. I love the podcast, and any time I can ever be of service, you know where to find me. I'll be right here. Thank you.
Thank you.